it's Claire again, CSE Cooney here. Welcome back to our Darkbreakers read-along, Chapter 10, Drawing the Poison. I remembered my microphone this time, so this might be a little clearer, hopefully. I don't know, maybe it robots out. We'll see what happens. It's always an adventure here in early learning how to Twitchlandia, Twitchland. I'm just so happy today because as I record, I just see the gates of Darkbreakers around me and I feel very, I guess, immersed in the world. You step through the gates, you're in the Volwood. I don't know. At least that's my magical thinking that does that. Anyway, I have to watch that except when I'm writing or reading fantasy. Chapter 10, Drawing the Poison. So what has just happened that you've just heard, just a small short recap, is that Sasura the Night Hag, the heir to the Volwood, has attacked Queen Nyx, Queen of the Darkbreakers. Queen Nyx is just like, girlfriend, you are young and I am very old and I have powers you have not yet dreamed of. Smack. She puts Nyx the Nightwalker puts Sasura into an iron cage. An iron shouldn't be able to exist in the Volwood. It's anathema to gentry. Nyx shouldn't even be able to speak it, much less dream it into existence, and she totally does. She puts Sasura into an iron cage and sinks her into an oubliette in some dark, forgotten corner of Darkbreakers until a woman who needs her more and is more desperate than Sasura is will find her one day in her hour of need. And just so you all know, that is what we call, what do we call that? It's like a footprint, an Easter egg, a foreshadowing. Yes, that's the right literary term. It's foreshadowing the third novella in the timeline. It's a standalone novella, so people have read it without any of this context. It's called Desdemona and the Deep. It was published by Tor.com in 2019. I did the audiobook for it. It's available anywhere audiobooks are sold. But the kind of rescue or reemergence of Sasura the Night Hag is but one of the small subplots of Desdemona and the Deep. But we'll leave her there for now. Bye-bye, Sasura. Time for her to mature as wine in an oaken barrel. So doth a goblin girl mature in an iron cage over time. So anyway, we have to return to Nyx the Nightwalker in her bower with Elliot, who Sasura has wounded horribly. He's been scratched up, but also poisoned because goblin girl talons, very bad for the health. I said a brief recap, didn't I? Well, now you know why when I'm supposed to write 100,000 word novels, I end up writing 180,000 novels and then have to cut 60,000 because I negotiate up to 120,000 words. That's just my process. And you love me for it. I know you do. You who are listening, because why else would you be listening? Chapter 10, Drawing the Poison. Thank you so much for being here. Elliot watched Nyxie with eyes that had grown heavy and oily. He saw bower and banquet table as through a greenly purple film, the color of a goblin girl's lips as she smiles and digs in her claws. He would like to paint in this palette, this color of poison. He would call the painting The Kiss of Hatch Latrodectes. Nyxie was angry, toweringly so. He could tell this even through the toxic oil slick. Her mouth bled at the corners. Her shadow was taller than the room could hold, horned and furious. He waited for her to remember him. When she did, she shook herself out and seemed to become a size he could comprehend. Elliot Howell. Nyxie sank to the floor at his side. Look at me now, and listen well. All efforts in the Volwood are aided by belief. I tell you now. What a goblin's scratch hurts, a gentry's mouth heals. Do you trust me when I say this? She stared at him as if willing him to believe her. Elliot was more than willing, but the evidence was against her. He was bleeding profusely. There were a dozen deep scratches all over his body, and they were already puffy, turning a mottled green and black, like the ichor that flowed through the night hag's veins. His flesh felt murky to him, his limbs unattached and yet still throbbing. He was beaded in drops of perspiration as large as pearls. The sick, purplish slick over his eyes was growing ever darker. Mistress, he whispered, I didn't know how to act. I couldn't help you. You did help me. You sheltered me as I made my deep magic. You were as the very walls of my house. Bauer, she called then, and he did not think she was talking to him. A moment later, the dais of furs and feathers that had stood across the room erupted beneath him like the softest geyser. He was suddenly so much more comfortable, he started to weep, and immediately began to worry that his sweat and blood and stinking self would ruin the beauty of the bed. But Nyx did not seem anxious about any of this. She leapt into the bed beside him and took his head upon her knees. "Only promise me, boy," she murmured, "that you shall not perish from these wounds. I swear to grant whatever boon you beg for, up to half my realm, and my firstborn child." "Sure," he tried to agree, but the sound smeared, deflating into a gasping sigh. Nixie stroked his hair back from his forehead. "Promise me," she insisted. "I need you to speak the words, Elliot Howell. Speak them with conviction." Elliot wanted to do whatever she asked. But what was he promising again? Had Nixie said something about her firstborn child? Their firstborn child. They might name her after his mother, Effie, or her mother. Did the gentry have mothers? Did they hatch like goblins? Were they born of mandrake root or magnolia blossom? Or they might have a boy, of course, in which case, no, it wouldn't be a boy. Lips thick and numb, words slurred and muddy, he mused, "Always wanted to be a dad. Love my dad. You have to meet him. Don't know what Ma'll make of you. Say you're too much like my paintings." "That," said Nixie, "is not a promise. I need you to." "I promised to paint you," Elliot whispered. "Didn't I?" This at last seemed to satisfy her. Her voice much warmer, she replied, "Yes, that you did, my love. Now that is oath enough to live on. You cannot paint me you cannot die until you paint me." He wanted to please her always, that she would always smile thus upon him. "I'll paint you 1,000 times," he vowed. 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. "Even better." Her dark voice deepened. "And I will hold thee to that vow, my Elliot." She peeled a few of the purring furs from his body, where they had cuddled up to snuggle him the moment he had fallen into the bed, or the bed had fallen up to him, however it had happened. The air against his torn flesh howled at him. Nixie clucked her tongue, a noise of wrath and assessment. Elliot did not think she was angry at him, but still he flinched. Her hand immediately stroked his face again, calming him. "Come thou near," said she, taking one of his arms onto her lap and tracing the angry scratches there. "Let us see what we must do about these fell wounds." Elliot moaned. His flesh burned with fever. His every joint ached. Like iron stakes were driven through shoulders, hips, knees, thumbs, elbows, ankles. Her fingers explored the poisoned scratches, and he moaned again. "Hush, beloved. All is well. All shall be well." He could feel Nixie softening herself for him, her voice, her touch, yes, but also her aspect, that he might lay more comfortably against her. Through swollen, slitted eyes, he watched the antler crown recede back into her skull, absorbed by bone. The silver thorns and chains vanished from her arms and hair, leaving only her rose-petal robes. She slid Elliot's upper body across her thighs, settling his head against her chest. She did not have a heartbeat exactly, not the way he understood a heartbeat. If her enemies opened up her chest, they might find a ruby-throated hummingbird at the center, or a whirlpool inhabited by leviathans, or the moon in all its phases, or all of this, all at once. "What of your enemies?" She said they're waiting outside the walls. His lips were moving, he knew, but Elliot could not tell if they were forming the right words in the right order. He could not tell if he was thinking the words or saying them aloud. Whatever he said, or didn't say, as usual Nixie seemed to understand his very thoughts, for she answered just as though he had spoken like a sensible man. "Their leader is vanquished. When the traitors of my former court learn of this, they will either flee my wrath, or stand together to take me down, most likely choosing another to take Susura's place. General Lorela has been coveting the antler crown since before the wars. I am told she was a strong contender. She has, Nixie admitted, a cunning kind of mind, even a dreaming one. But her dreams are narrow. They pertain only to herself. But never fret just now about my naughty realm, dear Eliot. The walls of Darkbreakers will hold through the night. One night. One night by standards of 8th, Nixie added quickly. I keep mortal time by the bells, otherwise you might be here a century and never know it. I wouldn't mind. I would. This war may last as long should I engage with it, and it is by no means certain I will triumph at that, and then, my boy, where would you be? With you? You are feverish. But Eliot watched her lift her chin to contemplate the quicksilver walls, as if prognosticating from their glimmerings and tremblings the verdict of the battle to come. For a brief second, he thought he saw the walls bulge inwardly, as if absorbing some impact or concussion from without. Whatever it was, whatever it meant, it made Nixie's shoulders snap back and her eyes flash like a midnight air raid. She addressed the walls directly, as if addressing her troops. Our outer fortifications may fall, indeed will fall, to our foes, but it is on you to shatter sagely. Let your towers crumble like wise avalanches. Bury our enemy in cairns of their own making. From your rubble, raise mazes enough to confound and imprison whoever climbs through. But, she added in an icicle voice, though they win through, though they bring all their might to bear, to breach our defenses, this room remains adamantine and indomitable. These doors are locked. Nothing disturbs us till the bone bells ring again. After that, stand ready for my next command. The walls heard and obeyed. Or else, perhaps, Eliot was just hallucinating the moment that those mirror-like, ever-falling quicksilver curtains froze, hardening all around them, entombing them in a thick fastness of diamond, and sealing them off from the rest of the Volwoad. And then he stopped paying any attention to the walls at all, for Nixie had bent her head over his arm and was licking the first of his wounds. He cried out again, like a frightened child. She lifted her head. Have you fainted? He made a noise to show he had not. I know my tongue is rough. She apologized. It is not always so, I vow, but right now it must be, in order that I abrade the poisoned flesh and draw the venom from your wounds. I like it. Nixie blinked at him, and then, but might this just be Eliot's fevered imagination? She blushed and ducked her head and licked him again. The second scratch she tended was particularly deep and seeping. Nixie dragged her tongue along the swollen seam, then gagged and spat and lapped again, laving up the thing that was trying to kill him. Will it hurt you? To Eliot's surprise, his voice sounded stronger now. He was even almost sure that he had asked the question aloud this time. Nixie glanced up from her work again and shook her head. It might. It will, yes. But it does not matter. I allowed this. I owe you this. Eliot made a face at the face Nixie was unconsciously making. How does it taste? Like rotten grapes in moldy beef aspic, she sighed, and bent her head again. Eliot settled back into the furs, which kept up their low, comforting hum. Something feather-soft and warm brushed his hair from his brow, but it was not Nixie. A wing? A tail attached to one of the pelts? But though it was not Nixie, it also somehow was, as if a part of her were directing it, just as the strawberry he had eaten was also, somehow, Nixie, and the room itself, and the bed. Talk to me a while, Nixie directed him. Distract me from this onerous chore with some mortal anecdote. He heard the smile in her voice. If you please, my beloved Eliot. Elliot thought a moment, letting his eyes roam dreamily over the canopy draping the bed. Embroidered tapestries showing a one-eyed gentry queen fleeing from danger in a boat with a black-haired babe at her feet. He began, "We all had nicknames, in university. Mine was the monk, because I'm shy, and talking to people, the kinds of people I admire, is hard for me. I get clumsy. Well, you saw, I trip over things, my own tongue. Sometimes I have to leave the room. So people thought I was, I don't know, too fastidious for lovemaking, or not interested. But that wasn't it. I'm no Raquel, only it's hard to connect. Sometimes it's like I'm moving through a medium that isn't quite air. Anna, though, she connected. One smile, and she burnt right through me. And she burnt right through to me. Anna can connect with anyone, even Gideon, and for some reason, Gideon, he is bitter with everyone, but he is gentle with me. Anna says that even a mass murderer may still love his dog, but I don't think that's it. More like we're the same, the three of us. We move through a slightly different medium than air. Anna's just better at it than I am, and Gideon is worse. We might all be monks, 3 anchorites in some uncanny monastery. Anna's nickname was the Hick. She comes from the country. Gideon's was the Stick because of, well, Miss Mannering says it's because of the stick up his... But the reason I said all this is, I don't know, I think I'm rambling. Nixie, I can feel you smiling against my skin, especially when I talk about Anna. You'd like her, I think. You've stopped licking me. Are you all right? When she raised her head, Elliot could see that Nixie's eyes were filmed in the same green-purple as his had been. On her lips the black stain of ichor mingled with the drying blood there. Her braids were damp, her brown skin ashen and burnished with sweat. Elliot's own vision was much clearer now, as was his head. He sat up and crawled over what seemed miles and piles of petals and feathers and fur to get to her, even though she had never once left his side. "What will it do to you?" he demanded. "How much damage? Mistress, will you recover? You will not die." He took her by her shoulders, and her flesh raged hot beneath his hands. "You should not have done it. You should not have saved me, not like this." Nixie opened her mouth and started to answer, "Boy." But her eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped down in the furs. When Nix awoke, her head was splitting like her antler crown was growing the wrong way down. Meanwhile, Elliot had turned her banquet into his studio. Laid out before him in little silver bowls were what had been the blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, damsons, and lingonberries. Now the fruit in each bowl had been mashed to a fine pulp, some set to simmer over teapot warmers. Carafes of water and jars of honey stood by, ready to be mixed in. She could hear him murmuring requests to the table, which listened to him as though he spoke with her own voice, or as if he had asked Nix directly when she was fully awake. From out of its quick-moving currents the table produced for him jars of spices, paprika, powdered chili and beetroot, golden turmeric, chamomile and black tea leaves, dried juniper berries, cornflowers and calendula, as well as glass canisters of arrowroot powder, alabaster bowls brimming with charcoal, goblets of egg yolks for tempera, slender flasks of oil, and casks of clear wine to create the correct consistencies. Elliot complimented the table every time it brought forth what he requested, and Nix felt the compliments land in her own chest, filling her with the desire to lavish him with more gifts, more treasures, anything he wanted, any wish, whatever. But he only asked for what he needed, and he mixed his paints using the ingredients, with a joyful intensity that brightened his body as if the sun of another world shone directly upon him. Nix sat up. The effort to unglue her eyelids all the way almost undid her, but the slow, steady rumbling from the crystalline walls coaxed her from her lethargy. They were under siege. Elliot knew it as well as she. Slipping from the bed, Nix went to stand quietly at his side, observing his work. He smiled over at her, but continued mixing, mashing, pouring, and testing steadily until his different paints reached the consistencies and colors he desired. "I didn't know if the paint I normally use would hurt you," he explained as he worked. "Iron hurts you, even though you have command over it. But I didn't know what other minerals might. But I thought, maybe, if you could call fruit to your table, it probably wouldn't hurt you to wear it." Now Nyx did speak, blurted, really. "Wear it? When I paint you." "When you paint me?" "Yes, mistress." Eliot's hands lifted, almost without his volition. They shaped something for her, as if mere explanations would never suffice. Nyx sucked in a breath. She almost saw his vision right then, drawn for her in the air. The power of it buffeted through him into her, like a great wind produced by the frantic machine of his heart. But she asked anyway, just to make sure. "You do not wish to paint a painting of me? You wish to paint a painting upon my body?" I thought, they say, it said... Eliot stopped, took a deep breath. He was a little worried still, she thought, of appearing a fool in front of her. She kept her gaze steady on him, but gentled her smile and deepened her breathing, which of course deepened his. He tried again. "I was trying to remember any old gentry tales having to do with the wars. No one believes gentry tales where I come from, but I've made a study of them for my thesis because voluptuists believe... Well, never mind. Anyway," he laughed a little, "it's no good to doubt those stories now, is it? Because here I am." "What do your stories say?" Nyx stuck a finger in a jar of honey and presented it to his lips to taste. Eliot looked as astonished as a baby at first suck, but opened his mouth and sucked and sucked. He sucked until Nyx's toes curled and her thighs tightened, until Eliot's knees began to buckle. But he drew back at last and breathed again and told her, in olden days, when the world flower was one, and mortals and gentry and goblins made alliances with each other and wed each other and did battle amongst the worlds, then sometimes gentry armies would march with mortal poets at their fore. And these poets, they would sing or chant or declaim the victory of the battle to come. They would invent the outcome, set it to song or rhyme. Both armies, of course, would have their own poets, so it was sometimes like a duel. The better poet, the one who wrote the better poem, or even who spoke the poorer poem better, it was said that they could win a battle merely by saying so. But they had to say it just so. They were called rhymers, Nyx acknowledged softly. Mortal poets stolen for the power of their words. Often they were the first to die. Our impsy knights knew to target enemy rhymers first. We sent assassins after them, and sorcerers. Lures, bribes, blackmail, anything to keep them from the front. Yes, those tales are true." "Well?" Eliot raised his head to meet her gaze. He had removed his blue velvet jacket and his patched linen shirt, both now torn and bloody. His broad chest was spattered with berry juice and egg yolk and wine, his trousers and chest hair dusted with spices and herbs, his hands stained from fingers to wrist. "I am not a poet," he said. "No," Nyx agreed, "but I could paint you. I could paint you victorious. The other side, the ones waiting for you, they don't have a mortal painter, do they? Or a rhymer. They don't have anything like me." "No." There was nothing, Nyx thought, and no one, not in this or any world, like Eliot Howell. It's why you brought me here, isn't it? To be your weapon, somehow? One way or another?" Nyx smiled suddenly. Mortals! Here she had just awoken, bruised, battered, raw, half dead of poison, most of her dreaming mind absorbed in the siege taking place just outside their sanctuary, but within moments of this intimate, finger-sucking conversation with Eliot Howell, she was starting to feel fickle and ticklish. More, she was glowing like a gas lamp, vibrating like a tuning fork. Strength and hope and right pure mischief flooded her. Her bare feet shifted on the malleable floor, threatening to dance off across the room without her. She gestured to the banquet table turned paint palette. True, I brought you here because I thought you might be of some use to me. This, however, is not what I imagined. But then mortals rarely do or are what we imagine. Even among ourselves, Eliot murmured. It is why you are so mysterious, Nyx said, hearing the merry flirt in her voice despite everything. It is why you are so thrilling and exciting and desirable. That, too, is why I brought you here. Because I wanted to. Because I wanted you. Or perhaps, she said, watching his tongue wet his lips, watching his helpless hitch of breath as he swayed toward her. Perhaps that was the sole and only reason. I merely made this paltry insurrection my excuse to steal you. After all, she continued quietly, almost to herself, I need not play their little war games. I need not endure their treacheries. I have strength enough to detonate myself, and take the kernel dream of the Valwode with me. Wipe us all out. The gentry I dreamed from infancy to immortality, and all those other older, vainglorious gentry, products of ancient, bygone dreamers who remember the very dawn of the Vale. Only, the thought makes me sad and tired. I am tired of wars. I am tired of dreaming for everyone else. I want to look at paintings, and hear music, and read books, all created whole out of other people's dreams. Mistress, Nyx snorted. You may as well call me by my name, Eliot Howell. His voice, his breath caught on the syllables. He had heard Saussure utter them, but had not yet dared himself. Queen Nyx? She interrupted. Do you know, Eliot Howell, I believe I prefer Nyxie after all, now that I've licked you clean and slept in your arms. Please, Nyxie, said Eliot. Please what? Do not set yourself to your own destruction. Save yourself. Spare them. Ha! Nyx turned away from him. I do not yet know what I shall do. It need not concern you, boy. If I win, the traitors must bear the consequences of betraying me. If I lose, if I tap myself out with dreaming, the victors might take my husk and dump it in the depths of Bana, where whatever is left of me would be devoured. A true death, a rare and precious thing for the gentry. And they, she laughed again bitterly, they would think it a victory. Indeed, they would live on a while, a very long while by your mortal standards, without me. But eventually they would begin to senesce without a dreamer to dream them. Like a fountain cut off from its source, so would go the Valwode, without its breaker queen. The fountain may start out full, fish may swim there, birds may drink there, but little by little the water will go still and stale. It will be befouled. It will utterly evaporate. No more birds, no more fish, no more fountain. But the gentry will not consider this. Only I consider this, and I confess it weighs less and less with me. Nyxie, no more talking now, she ordered him, setting a hand to his red lips. If you want a certain outcome, Eliot Howell, for me, for the gentry, for the very Valwode, then you must paint it. Rhymers do not argue with gentry royalty. Though, she admitted, in days of old, gentry royalty did tend to bespell their mortal rhymers up to the eyeballs, just to make sure they did as they were told. And even then, mortals, they still managed to surprise us. Eliot had turned back to his bowls and plates and goblets. He began arranging them according to some private principle of color Nyx did not understand. You have bewitched me, he said quietly. Have I? Nyx inquired just as quietly. I think not. I invited you. It is different. I hope you can see that. You were given a choice. You chose to follow me, and for that I will see you safely home. But before that happens... Spinning around from him, she impulsively swept out her hands and cleared a space for herself on the table. Baskets of bread and platters of pastries went flying and crashed to the floor or against other dishes and bowls further down. Laughing at the cataclysmic sound, Nyx sprang onto the table and perched there, regarded Eliot expectantly. Now, where were we, Eliot Howell, before the night hag burst in to heckle our revels? Eliot regarded her, full ripe, full tempting as a summer orchard, and smelling as sweet. Before, he said, smiling slow and rapturous, you were not wearing rose petals. Nyx's robe of rose petals obligingly vanished, and Eliot took an involuntary but not unwilling step closer to her, where she waited at table's edge. His breathing was almost as labored as when he first arrived in Darkbreakers. Nyx thrust out one leg and hooked it around his hips, drawing him closer. He went right up to her, his hands gentle but urgent. He did not seem to know where to touch her first, and so he tried to touch everything. This close to him, Nyx could scarcely remember her own name. She was having the most trouble with his clothes. His evening trousers were mortal made. She could not just wish them away, though she tried 3 different times to do so before realizing it would not work that way. That was fine, everything was fine. Ripping worked just as well. And it turned out, in some ways, the banquet table was even better than the bed. The first time they made love, it was fast and fumbling, adolescent in every sense, over in minutes. Eliot trembled over her like a stallion after winning his first race. She waited till his breathing steadied again, then rolled him off her, pushed him upright, holding him still until he seemed less likely to melt to the floor. When she had him stable once more, she flung herself off the table and swarmed his body, climbed him, wrapped her thighs around his middle, pressed her breasts to his chest, and locked her arms about his neck. Then she lay her cheek against his and set her lips to his ear, a detour here and there for nibbles and licks, urgent whispers, kisses, and asked her lover the question that might turn the tides of this war. Will you paint to me now? Yes. Will you array me for battle? Yes. We folk of the Valwood are a people impervious to pain, but not to beauty. Beauty, made by mortal hands, will render us almost impotent. If we hear a human song, we must dance. If we see a human sculpture, we must freeze in imitation. What will it do to my enemies, Eliot Howell, when these doors open at midnight and I walk out among them clad in your colors, armored in your visions? How will you work your will upon them? How will you rhyme me? I will do what I have always tried to do, said the painter. I will show them something they have never seen. I will show them a future of the 3 worlds, as one. I will show them not the queen they thought they knew, but a power far more wise and merciful and victorious and new. A thrill of fear washed through her, deeper than the deepest shallows of her shallow world. But she nodded. She trusted him to do what he did best, and to remake her, so that she might remake the world. The first of his paints he selected was a dark, rich red. He dragged his fingers through the bowl, and then set them to her forehead, brushing a jagged line of color all the way to her chin. He dipped again, more red. The line continued down her throat, her sternum, her belly. Then, with a delicate arching of his thumbs, a flare of his fingers, he smeared the paint into red wings across her breasts. Her neck became the neck of a firebird, her belly a flaming tail. Yellow now, orange, flames curling over her shoulders, black and brown, the ashes whence they sprung, blue, the very tips of the fire where it burned the hottest. Nyx yelped, Boy, that thine art doth scorch me. Eliot's smile flickered, different than any smile she had seen from him before. Confident, engrossed, perhaps a little secretive. Exhilaration and desire throomed through her with the crack of cannons. He knew what he was doing to her, his finger work, delicate and deft, scalding in purpose. Tongues of blue and green scalloped her eyes and cheeks. He worked between the dark runes dancing across her face, always careful not to cover them. Clever boy. Much later he finished, and began lightly dusting her all over with arrowroot powder, setting the paint. She must have stopped breathing at some point, because when Eliot suddenly stopped and peered into her eyes, she gasped aloud, his stained hands threading through her braids, tugging them lightly. Nyxie, he said with that curling imp of a smile, My work is done. Nyx retorted, I think not, and springing from the table, dragged him back to the bower she had made for them. There she laid him down, and, careful, so careful of his art upon her body, settled herself atop him. The bells were not yet tolling, but Nyx knew they had so little time. The next chapter will be chapter 11, The Unveiling. So we're drawing to a close here at our first novella in the Dark Breakers read-along. This is The Breaker Queen. There's, I think, The Unveiling and then maybe one other chapter. And I am sorry to say this, but I am going to be out of town next week at a wedding. And then the following week and the next few weeks after that, I will actually be recording audiobooks for my living. I have a cozy mystery. I have my own novel, St. Death's Herald, the sequel to my novel, St. Death's Daughter, which is published by Solaris, and Recorded Books is putting it out. And I have another cozy mystery, and I have a fantasy novel for Ruadan Books, I believe. Yeah, so all of that's very exciting, and it will make me money, which is also very exciting, but it does put a bit of a pause on the Dark Breakers read-along. I will try in the interstices, if I have voice enough, to record the last few chapters, but it may not be on a Tuesday morning, and I'll put them up and announce them. And then in April, I'll reassess, what do I want? Do I want to read another novella here, or shall we get along with other programming, probably on Monday nights, often a shop talk with another artist or game designer, writer. We'll have a couple people being highlight as they have books come out, and we'll probably do a couple playthroughs of the game Negocios Infernalis. So I will post those to my blog, csecooney.com, and to my Substack, which is Substack/CSE Cooney, something like that. And really, you can @ CSE Cooney and find my stuff anywhere. Instagram, Facebook is /CS Cooney, and Blue Sky @ CSE Cooney, whatever the Blue Sky thing is. So all of those are places you can find me, and I will be posting everywhere about where this next installment is going to happen and what our plans are. I really love reading Dark Breakers aloud. I'd love to do a short crowdfunding campaign sometime and get enough money to make it a legitimate audiobook, not just here up on the YouTubes and the Twitch. But really, I have so much fun reading aloud to you, or this sense of reading aloud live, recording it, and knowing that sometime in the future, some of my friends and family will be listening to it with pleasure. And despite all my ums and uhs and stumbling occasionally, which wouldn't happen in a real audiobook, it is so fun to read aloud. So I've had so much fun with this, and I'm going to finish this installment. If you miss me and you want other books, I've narrated over 120 audiobooks, and several of my own: Bone Swans Stories, which is a collection of stories, St. Death's Daughter, which is really long, so if you want hours and hours of me, and Desdemona and the Deep, which does take place in this world and features Chaz, who you met earlier, Desdemona Mannering, who you met earlier, and Saussure the Night Hag, who you've recently met. Those are the three, I would say, main characters. And they reoccur in the Dark Breakers collection as well. And in my novel that I'm working on right now called Fiddle, which is, if you fast forward 75 years in the future, like in this world's 1980s, they're in there. Some of them are in there. And that's pretty hilarious to write. So that's what I'm up to. Yeah, so traveling and a lot of audiobooks in my future. And I will post a schedule to my blog and Substack soon. All right, take care out there. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.